Good day, everyone. I've got about 5 minutes until the top of the hour. We're going to let some folks still come make their way here, and we will be starting shortly. Well, hello, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone to the year-end tips and tricks webinar for Sage BusinessWorks. For those of you who have not participated with us in the past, this is a two-part session. The first part, we will be discussing more of the core modules, general ledger, accounts receivable, inventory, accounts payable. And then the second half of the session that we'll conduct after a short break will be focused on the payroll module. So I want to welcome everyone here today. We're going to fasten up our seat belts and keep our hands and feet inside the ride at all times. To participate in the webinar, you will notice your control panel that you have. You are welcome to type in questions and we will address them as we can. If it's a pretty intense question, we may ask you to take it offline. Otherwise, we will have a short period of question and answer available at the end of each section. My name is Mary Hildinger, and I have been with DWD Technology Group for, I'm going to just say a few days. Actually, I started with DWD in 1996, so I just recently celebrated my 26th anniversary with the firm, and I have been spending well over, oh goodness, 22, 23 years working with the BusinessWorks product. I've got my email address there, and of course we've got phone numbers available as well. If any of you needs CPE credit, I'd like you to please address an email to Leah Peters, lpeters@dwdtechgroup.com. Just indicate whether you need credit for one half or both halves of today's event, and she will make sure that the letters get out to you over the next few days. What are we going to do today? Well, today we just did a little brief welcome. I want to share a little bit about DWD for those of you who may not be terribly familiar with us. I want to talk a little bit about maintaining history and archiving your company as we roll forward year after year. We're going to talk about the order of closing modules. What kinds of things do we need to be aware of as far as AP, AR, general ledger, a little bit of inventory. And then we will have some time for questions and answers and take a little break for those of you who process payroll with your BusinessWorks software. I hope that you plan on sticking around for the second half. If you're not processing payroll, but you'd like to learn a little bit, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, feel free to go about your day and continue with what is going on in your life. So who are we? DWD Technology Group. We are a division of Doolin, Ward, and Dewald CPAs. The technology division was established back in 1990. We currently have 3 office locations. Our primary office is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We have an accounting office located in Marion, Indiana, and we have another technology presence in Indianapolis. We are focused, our physical focus is in Indiana, but we do reach across the country. I'm looking through some of the names of the folks on here, and I know I've got some folks down from the south and got some folks out west a little bit, and we do handle all over the country. We have the ability with remote connection technology to support pretty much anybody anywhere. DWD CPAs is approximately 60 employees, and with almost half of us in the technology group. We help perform software and business consulting, and our expertise lies in manufacturing, distribution, and accounting functions. What software do we offer? Well, obviously BusinessWorks, that's why y'all are here today. We also offer Sage 100, which is an ERP solution, kind of a mid-market solution. We are offering Sage Intacct, which is a true cloud-based solution. We've got about four team members who focus on the Intacct solution. We also deal with Sage 50, MIP fund accounting, handle Sage fixed assets, Sage HRMS, which is a human resource management software, and then Sage CRM, which is a contact relation or customer relations management software. I think that's what CRM stands for. I never remember that because my boss is CRM and his initials don't stand for contact resource management. What do we do? Software services. We certainly help with training and support and setting up new software. We help facilitate software upgrades. We do custom report writing and data import export. We can help you with rebuilding your data files. And for those solutions where we can facilitate systems integrations with third-party processes. We also have a network team. So we've got the smart guys that actually do the Microsoft certifications. We can help with business intelligence. We can help with manufacturing efficiencies. And we've got some products that we can use with scanning, work order scanning and efficiency, warehouse automation. Again, a lot of these are not related to BusinessWorks, but they do relate to our other products. So let's talk a little bit about history retention. I am going to move relatively quickly here today. If you need, in your control panel of your meeting, there is a handouts section. If you did not receive the handouts or you don't have them currently in front of you, you are welcome to download them from the handouts section. Please feel free to grab a copy of that. This is what I will be talking about here today. We are also recording this session, so we will be providing links to those of you who have attended, and make sure that you get a copy of the recording so that you can review it again as you need. With the history retention, why do we do that? Well, of course, we want to be able to look back at details of transactions as they have occurred in our software. BusinessWorks is somewhat of what I would call a perpetual software. We just keep going and going and going. But at a certain point in time, depending on how we have our settings in our modules, we might start to collapse some of those details. And rather than having an infinitely sized data file for our software, we start trimming it off as we identify when we're going to start truncating that information. So in a module by module basis, and you'll notice on my slide here, I show you the general ledger status and the accounts payable status. We've got settings for how long we are keeping our detail. And in the GL, the company, my test company, actually holds the details for up to 2 years. And the 2 years is based on the current month of the software. So in my GL example, I'm actually in June of 2020. So that means my details and my summary histories are available for 2 years prior to that point. If I recall correctly, General Ledger allows me to go out to 9 years, both for the journal detail and for the summary history. So you're welcome to change that at any point in time. You would change that by going into the GL parameters. The other source modules, AP, AR, and so on, they all have their own independent settings. And if the settings are referred to in months, then the cap is typically 60 months or 5 years. If it's set up as years, then it's typically a maximum of 9 years that we can keep that information. We like to have you review those settings, especially if there's been transition in the personnel running the software. Somebody might have had a reason why they set it to a certain level, but if we've got somebody new and we want to make sure that we're holding enough information available, you want to review these settings and make changes if necessary. Excuse me. Notice that if we set the history too high, it could start to drag, searching for records, bogging down, printing reports, and so on. But if you need to go back and you need to look at things, it does make it a little bit easier because that information is within the company in which you're working rather than needing to switch over to an historical company, which we're going to talk about those two here in a little bit. When we get to points in accounts payable and accounts receivable, we can certainly start to remove those things as that detailed history gets summarized and moved out of the way. How do we do this? How do we create an archive company? Well, to create a new company code, I neglected to update this to say 2022. I apologize for that. What we do is we can just go in and do a backup. And I'm going to take us into our BusinessWorks software here. The easiest way that I have found to make a backup on the fly, we do have to make sure everybody's out. Okay, so someone with manager permissions would go into the utilities folder all the way at the very top of BusinessWorks and go into the maintain companies function. Once we get into the maintain companies function, we get presented with a list of all of our companies that are available to us. And we can figure out which one is our live company. So I can go ahead and grab one. Excuse me. And there is a button here to the far right that looks like a couple of pieces of paper overlaying. When I click on this button, it will allow me to copy the contents exactly as they are into a new company ID. So I can go ahead and give it a new name. If I want to propagate the security from the live company into the demo company, I may do that by clicking copy user security. I might not want to do that because I don't want other people to accidentally grab this company code and start posting transactions. But again, you might just to allow them the visibility into that historical company. And I go ahead and I process, and it will run as quickly as a normal backup and a restore process would run for you. So I don't have a lot of data in this company. It does make it a little bit easier for me. As we do our closing, and especially at a fiscal year end, a lot of things do get purged out, again, based on the number of years or months that you've got your history maintained. And if, as we're doing that, we can revert back to those historical companies if we need to search something that is processed prior to the historical lengths that we have opted to keep. So what do we do about prior period posting? Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing, sometimes that's a scary thing. What we can do within the software in BusinessWorks is we can change settings at the company level, okay? It's not a user by user thing, it is at the company level. We can allow for prior month posting, which means I could potentially go in and post back into what we consider a closed year. I can say, no, I don't want to allow anybody to post in those closed periods. Or I can kind of split the difference and say, well, you know, maybe it's October or November, a transaction I need to do, and it's dated back for April of that current fiscal year. Yes, if I have the current fiscal year option enabled, I may go ahead and allow that posting to occur. So that's kind of the difference splitter between letting everybody post or letting nobody post. You might want to check those settings as you go through. Let's talk a little bit about what's supported in BusinessWorks. Sage Software has a philosophy for the BusinessWorks side where it supports the current and prior version. Right now, our current version is version 2021. There is a service pack, I think service pack 10, which is the most current service pack for that version. And then we also have BusinessWorks version 2020. Those are the only two that if you have to call into Sage and you need support, they may not support you because they will tell you that your software is obsolete and you should upgrade. If you've got your current client care plan, it always maintained, so your payments are caught up to date with Sage, you are eligible to download and install whatever that current version and that current service pack is. That installation, a lot of people don't like to do that themselves. That's why they reach out to somebody like DWD, and we help them with that. If you've got IT people or if you're comfortable doing that, feel free. You can download that directly from Sage's website, and you can go ahead and install it by following those directions. The tax table updates are offered through the actual product updates or the service packs. So as we get close to the end of the year here, for those folks using payroll, you want to make sure that you are using a current service pack so that you do have the tax table updates for your version of the software. If you do not keep your software current, you will have to manually update those tax rates. Why do I need to upgrade? I don't, it's if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yes and no. I mean, yes, BusinessWorks is an incredibly stable platform. Like I said, I've been working with it for probably 22, 23, maybe even 24 years now, and it just works, right? But I also am dealing with some folks who have not upgraded since the early 2000s, and that starts to lend some difficulties with technology changes. I may not need the new bells and whistles, but my new computer might need the new bells and whistles. As hardware and software change, Sage doesn't necessarily test on unsupported hardware platforms. So if you're still cruising along with a Windows 95 machine and you're trying to upgrade to BusinessWorks 2020 or 2021, I'm going to suggest that's not going to work. Or if I've got a excuse me, if I've got a Mac computer, obviously we know Mac computers don't work. We do need to keep that keep it in the Windows platform. Just because your software isn't broken, you probably want to consider doing those upgrades. There are new features and functions that come out on a regular basis, and in order to take advantage of those, we have to stay current. If you've got questions, obviously you are more than welcome to reach out, and we can assist you with, excuse me, with whatever you might need as far as a service pack or an actual version upgrade. Obviously, as I've mentioned, upgrades are not about the bells and whistles, but sometimes there's a little bugaboo that might be hanging around from a prior version that will get fixed in a service pack or a version update. Microsoft. It seems like every time they turn around, they're sending down updates or new operating systems or what have you. And if the computer on which you are running your BusinessWorks happens to pass out and not be revivable, that version of BusinessWorks that you've been running for the last 25 years probably won't work on a new computer. So, we want to make it as painless as possible to keep you current, but also, realize technology is changing regularly. And if you're paying for those updates through your client care plan, take advantage of it. Also, the product updates that are available are only available for those two versions, the current and the prior year version. Tax table information we can't get our hands on. So as I've mentioned just a couple of moments ago, you will have to make those changes manually and then be subject to, hey, if there's something wrong, it wasn't the software that did it. All right. We've been talking a little bit about our modules. We've been talking about why do we do archives. We've been talking about making sure that we keep things current. Now we're going to talk a little bit about closing modules. And for those of you who are familiar with BusinessWorks and you've been around a little bit, you realize that accounts payable and accounts receivable You have to be in at least the current month of the calendar year or no more than 1 year or 1 month prior in order to be able to post transactions. So right now it's December of 2022, and my AR and or AP modules could be in November. I'm not going to be able to post transactions at the first of the year until I do a close. And the closing allows BusinessWorks to go through. It does its summaries. It will consolidate the information based on the amount of history that you maintain. And one thing that BusinessWorks has that some other softwares with which I work don't have is the ability to close multiple modules at one time. I've got some folks that I've transitioned from one software platform to another, and they're saying, "Well, what do I do?" And I'm like, "You got to go through each module each month." Are you kidding? Unfortunately, for those softwares, no, I'm not. But in BusinessWorks, we do have that ability to go ahead and close multiple modules at one time. A couple of rules about that. Let's go take a look. Make sure that all of my things are closed out here. And when I go up to that utilities menu, remember this is the utilities menu at the uppermost level. The utilities menus within each module, different functionality related directly to those modules. But the utilities menu here, I have a function called company close. When I go into that company close, the first thing that it's going to ask is that realize this is an exclusive option, and you want to make sure that nobody else is in your company while you're doing this, otherwise it won't let you in. The next thing that it offers is for you to make a backup. And I cannot stress backups are a lifeline. I've had some folks that have been in the middle of a close procedure and the power got cut off. There is absolutely no guarantee that your data is any good anymore in a situation such as that. Yes, drastic it might be, but not necessarily uncommon. So before you start your closing process, especially if you're doing this like a whole bunch of modules at one time, I strongly recommend that you go ahead and let BusinessWorks do the backup, or you make a backup before you start this process. Once I get that prompt answered, where I see that I am, I can look at each module and I can identify, okay, general ledger, cash management, accounts payable, they're all in the month of June. However, AR, inventory, order entry are all in the month of July. I can only close modules that are in a common open month. And when I'm closing modules, I guess the holy trinity here of accounts receivable, inventory, and order entry, those guys all always need to be in the same month. So the company close function here is really amazing to ensure that I do get all three of these closed concurrently, and that way I never run into issues with messages, let's say, for example, in order entry, where my order entry isn't in the correct month, or inventory and AR are out of sync, so I can't process sales orders or invoices from the order entry module. If I tried to close all these other modules when they are not in the same framework or same current open month, BusinessWorks is going to let me know. You know, when closing more than one module, they all must be in the same month. So I just would go ahead and deselect the ones that I don't want to close, get them closed up appropriately so that these all could live in the same month as necessary. So we've got the backup we talked about. We really don't want you to skip that if you can avoid it. And that gets you the close. So as we're cruising through here with our updates, we talk about Um, excuse me, we talk about the service packs having the various updates. And those things we want to make sure get put in place. Um, and I think I've got a slide off spot. Oh, I apologize. I do. Cool. I'll talk about tax table updates in a little while. I apologize for that. Let's talk about, or let's remind ourselves of the proper order of closing. Ideally, we all know that payroll needs to close every month because I can't cut payroll checks if I don't have it in the correct calendar month. We talked a little bit about accounts payable and accounts receivable, where the receivables can or payables can only be processed 1 month into the future. I can, if my system settings allow for historical posting or posting backwards, I'm allowed to do that. But if I'm in November and I have an invoice for January of the next year, I cannot post that until I get closed at least to the month prior or into December. We talk about AR, order entry, and inventory all closing together. We've got that nice way that we can facilitate that. If anybody's using job costs, you want to go ahead and get that closed. And we can then also close the general ledger as the last one. I have got a comment here that I want to bring up since we're talking about that. Um, the the comment is that we've never closed through the utilities menu, only through the modules. Is this a bad thing? Absolutely not. If that is the way that you are used to doing it, if that is the way that you are comfortable, there's absolutely no reason to change up what you're doing because you're getting the modules closed. In my opinion, that's the right answer. The only reason I show you the utilities option is to show you that we could do things concurrently. We could go ahead and get everything closed all at once. Sometimes, depending on when we're trying to do this, it's difficult because we've got people who are chomping at the bit to get back in the software, and if we have to make them wait a little too long, they get a little antsy. But if as long as you're getting those modules closed, you're doing it right. So thank you. That is a great question. All right, let's talk about some of the things that we need to do for the various modules before we go through those closing processes, especially at year end. Note that really on a month-to-month basis, those types of things typically should be done anyway. There will be a few things that we need to do for year end that are a little bit different. We'll talk about AP most especially. But before we close our module into the next month, we generally want to make sure that our bank accounts are reconciled. We want to make sure that we get invoices entered into the correct period, whether it be year end December, because it's now the new year, or whether it is a prior month. We also want to run our aging reports. We would like to make sure that those are as clean as possible for the year end. If you can avoid posting any future transactions, that would be recommended. But it's not always the end of the world. The nice thing about the aging reports, you can run it as of what I call the quote unquote current date, whatever today is that you're running it. You can backdate it. I have seen a little bit of inconsistency, especially if I get too far into the future, trying to go back and run an aging report as of a specific date, just with other transactions that have transpired, doesn't always keep that report as clean as infinitely possible. But you want to go ahead and grab copies of all of the reports that you use for your month end, probably most especially the aging report. And then as we talk about the year end, we talk about running the 1099s. We have the ability to track 1099s in our BusinessWorks software. And with versions 2020 and 2021, we have the ability to track our relatively new form, the 1099N NEC, non-employee compensation form. So we want to make sure that we're running current software so that we can track and process those forms properly. How do we get to our 1099s? These are found under the reports menu, and we get to them in the Form 1099E filing and reporting. And what do I need for that? There is a third-party software that you get prompted to install if you don't already have it installed. It's installed on a workstation by workstation basis. So I'm going to pick on a couple of people here. If I've got Becca and she's running AP and she's previously been the one who's been doing the 1099s, and then for whatever reason she asks me to do them this year, I need to make sure that I have that component installed because it is local to each user's workstation. You get prompted for it and it will prompt you to install it. If you don't have it, that's fine. That's called Atrix. In order to get access to that and to have accessibility to the current forms, you must be on an active maintenance support plan. When you go to print this is the biggest question I get every year. Can I print these on blank paper? Yes and no. You can print the recipient copies, but you must use the red pre-printed forms for the copy that goes to the federal government. For your 1099 miscellaneous forms, those are still the two-part forms. For the newer 1099 NEC, those are actually a three-part form. So you have to at least get the red copies, or you have to e-file. You may e-file them. If you want to send your recipient copies on paper, you can print them on a perforated four-part form. And then that squirrely 1096 summary form, that also must be red. So it may appear when we go through Atrix that it isn't going to print in red, but that's because Atrix will not print the grid lines and the text. It's just showing them to you so that we as humans can translate what those are. For accounts receivable, as we prepare for either a month end or a year end, we certainly want to make sure that all of our data entry is posted. We want to make sure that we've got all our cash receipts entered and we've got our invoicing caught up for the end of the month, end of the year. Always keeping in mind that when we do our cash receipts, the date that you post the receipt is the date that the general ledger gets affected, but the date that you do the deposit is the date that the bank gets affected. So if we've got some inconsistencies with the dates that we have received payments and the dates that we post those as bank deposits, we might have some inconsistencies when we try to do our bank reconciliation. If we are sending out statements to our customers, we certainly want to process any finance charges. If we're charging finance charges, get those statements out. And it would be ideal to get your aging report printed out as of the end of the month so that we can tie that back to our general ledger and make sure that everything is okay. I didn't have a lot in the agenda about inventory, but I certainly want to talk about that because for those of you who use inventory, it is a key module that we use, right? So as we're doing our period end or our year end processing, you might be getting ready for physical counts. You might be starting to go through and picking off those items that you need to adjust for your physical inventory in the software. If you're doing your physical count, you have to lock your inventory. Now, in BusinessWorks, what happens when we lock our inventory? We are not allowed to process anything else until we get those counts updated and we unlock the inventory. So timing is usually critical when we do that. Sometimes we have to kind of cease activities as far as posting for a day or two until we can get all those numbers updated. The other thing I caution people with regards to the physical count is make sure that you are counting what was on hand at the time that you locked that inventory. Sometimes people need to continue receiving or shipping inventory. And if, for example, I had 10 on the shelf at the time that I locked that inventory, and I received 5 and I sold 3, it looks like I've got 12 on my shelf. But when I enter that physical count, I need to enter it as the original 10. I do not want to take into regard, what's gone on with the physical nature of the materials because I haven't had the chance to make those postings for a receipt of goods transaction or for an invoice transaction that's going to consume that inventory. So you might consider a staging area for things that are coming, and hold off on shipping until you can finish your physical count entry. And then, of course, the key to that is get that inventory unlocked when you're done so that the rest of those transactions can be processed. The stock status report is kind of the golden standard for what you would then use to tie back to your balance sheet. All right, last but not least, it's our friend, the general ledger. It's kind of the basis that all of us accounting nerds thrive on. And what we want to make sure is that all of our other modules, our source modules, AP, AR, inventory, all of that is correctly talking with the general ledger, and that all of those subsidiary activities, such as physical counts or reconciling the bank, etc., all of that has been done prior to addressing what we do with the general ledger. If you've got recurring journals that are defined, you want to go ahead and post those. If you have manual entries that you need to process, often depreciation or other forms of adjusting entries, you certainly would like to get those in and ideally get them entered before you do your fiscal year-end close. What goes on with the general ledger when we do that closing? Basically, just as we know from our accounting backgrounds, for those of us that have had the opportunity to study accounting a little bit more in detail, we know that our net income or net loss closes into the retained earnings account. Depending on the form of your business, if you're an S corporation or a partnership or something of that nature and you've been paying out distributions, those do not manually close to the retained earnings account. Those would be adjusting entries that you would need to make at the beginning of the new year. We talked about the history as far as transaction history, number of years to retain summary history. What happens then? Well, as I pass those particular thresholds, then beginning balances get recalculated for those accounts in the GL based on the live activity that exists in the data. So if you're a data nerd like I am, you can go in and you can look at the data tables and you could see from one year to the next that beginning balances, that's actually a field in the data. That number would change based on how much time has elapsed and that how much history we are keeping. So some people use certain reporting tools that they need to access what that beginning balance is. Just keep in mind that that actually can change as your history expires. At this point, I've kind of ripped through a lot of the goodies with regards to our core modules, the general ledger, AR, AP, inventory. I would love to open this up for questions. If anybody has any questions or if there's something they'd like to see that I did not get a chance to show you. Got a great question here. I'm going to go ahead and read that out loud if that's okay. If we have to go back and make final adjusting entries after having closed the year end, we usually don't have this entry until, sometimes later. So yes, of course, your CPA firm is still working on their evaluation of your data, and they might offer those year-end adjustments. Does this cause problems if I, let's say it's February or March before I get those final year-end adjusting entries? Absolutely not. As long as you've got the setting to allow you to go back and post into historical periods, or certainly prior fiscal year, excuse me, you are welcome to go ahead and do that. BusinessWorks will recalculate the retained earnings changes because the net profit or loss would have changed probably as a result of those transactions. So no problems with that at all. Great question.
Mary, we had one person raise their hand. If that person has a question, raise your hand again and I can unmute your line and we can just
Absolutely.
ask it verbally.
Thank you, Sherry. Oh, and I forgot to introduce Sherry. Sherry Zimmerman is with us here this afternoon. She's kind of helping me keep an eye on questions because obviously she saw the hand raise and I didn't. So I'm glad she's here with us today. Thank you. Got another wonderful question that has come in and a comment. I'm going to talk to the comment here quickly. I did get corrected. Service Pack 11 for BusinessWorks 2021 is the most current service pack. So if you do not have that installed yet, and how can I tell? If I go to my help menu at the top of BusinessWorks and I select the About, then I can see the version and the service pack that is currently installed. So if yours does not say version 20 or version 2021, we probably want to talk about what we need to do to help you upgrade. I want to go back to another question that was brought up. 1099s, can they also be processed through the payroll module? No, they cannot, because the information is distinctive between employees and vendors. We will process the 1099s through the accounts payable side. You will note that the tool looks very similar between the payable side and the payroll side. And that is because that tool is powered by Atrix, and they have a similar interface. So it looks pretty similar, but the forms are very distinctive between one side and the other. And I am going to talk a little bit more about the payroll processing here after we come back from a little break. Do we have any other questions here today? All right. I do have almost quarter till. And if you folks would indulge me and be back by 10 till, so either 1:50 or 12:50 if you're on Central Time, or 11:50 if you're on Mountain Time, or 10:50 if you are on Pacific Time, we will reconvene. And those of you who want to discuss payroll, we will very happily talk about those kinds of things. And as a reminder, if you need CPE credit for this session, please let Leah Peters know. Just put a note in the subject line that you are asking for CPE credit for the BusinessWorks year end, and we'll get those letters out to you. All right, welcome back, everybody. It is about 10 till. This is Mary again from DWD, and I'm going to go ahead and continue rolling here with our payroll discussion. So the second half of today's session has to do with payroll-specific year-end activities, and that one's probably a lot harder than the other modules, so we are going to spend a little bit more time on this here today. Again, I don't think we have any newcomers here that came in at the break. But again, if you've got a question, feel free to submit it. You may use the raise hand function, and my friend Sherry's going to help me call those out if I happen to miss it. We'll either talk about it or ask you to unmute your line, or we'll help you unmute your line so that we can let you ask your question outright. And then, of course, we'll have some question time available at the end of the session. If you would like CPE for this section of the presentation today, again, please let Leah Peters know. Just let her know that you would like CPE credit for the second half of the BusinessWorks presentation today, and we'll get those letters out to you. And what are we going to do today? Well, we've already kind of done the welcome. We already know a little bit about DWD, so I'm not going to reiterate that. We're going to talk about some important things to note. We're going to talk about the payroll module itself and the year-end processing things. And we're going to talk about printing the forms with the enhanced tax reporting and e-filing, or ATRIX functionality. And again, just as a reminder, BusinessWorks only supports the current and one prior version. So currently it's version 2021. And we found out a little earlier that it is Service Pack 11 is the most current Service Pack. I don't remember what the 2020 is, but it's something similarly numbered, somewhere around 8, 9, 10-ish, if I recall. Before we close payroll, we always recommend making a backup prior to closing the month. Again, there could be something really bizarre that happens, and it would be somewhat disastrous to have to reconstruct because we don't have a good, clean backup right before we did this close. We have some things that happen at the end of the year with regard to our terminated employees. We have options where we can choose to keep the terminated employee history or remove that history. The other thing that we always recommend is making a year-end archive, very much like I showed you how to copy a company for the other module closing. It's often very handy to go ahead and make a copy that is payroll specific. That way payroll can get locked in for its year-end, and if the rest of the modules are not ready to be closed, it's okay. You can go ahead and get payroll moving forward because we do have to be in the proper month in order to cut payroll checks. The cool thing about this, and this is a difference from prior versions of BusinessWorks. Before ATRIX came into play, it was mandated that you ran your W-2s out of an historical company. You would have to make that backup, and you could not run your W-2s after you started processing payroll in the new year. With the ATRIX reporting, the enhanced state or enhanced federal and e-file or enhanced federal and state e-filing and reporting, we can go back and look at historical months and run forms from prior to January of the new year. That's been really, really handy. I still encourage you to make that backup, whether you choose to do your W-2s in the historical version or in the live version. That's up to you folks at this point. Here's where my slide for tax table updates should be. Just some notes about the tax table updates. We've got the federal and state withholding tax table changes, the wage limits, the federal unemployment rates and limits, the state unemployment limits, not your state unemployment rate. Big difference. So if your rate changes, I'm very familiar with the Indiana side of it. I know there are other folks from other states, but you want to get your unemployment rate entered before you start processing your payroll for the new year. Ideally, you know that, and you can get that. Otherwise, you're going to end up doing adjustments and some journal entries to get that caught up correctly on your books. Now, here's the big caveat. The tax table updates should not be applied until your W-2s and your fourth quarter payroll returns are completed and filed. The reason being is that the limits, especially the FICA limit, which has been increasing here lately, I think it's well over $100,000 now. I don't remember the exact number. But if you've got people that have made more than that amount and you drop the new tax tables in, you will get some disparities on your 941 reporting. So make sure you complete all of your 2022 tax reporting before you run the new tax table updates. I get some feedback from people, well, but then they're not going to have the right tax amount getting applied. True. Your alternative would be to manually adjust those tables to calculate the tax rates correctly. But again, especially for the FICA limit issues and things like that, you don't want the BusinessWorks tax table update to get applied because you'll end up getting some strange information on your W-2s. So keep that in mind as you do that. If you're okay with a little bit of, I'm going to call it fluff on your taxes for the first payroll or two of the year until you can get those things done, I find that it all washes out. You know, I'm gonna resolve it on my personal tax return. So if I don't have, if I've only got $22.37 getting withheld because the tax table didn't get applied right away, and after the tax table gets applied, I'm going to have $21.37 being withheld. I'm not going to get real upset about that. So you guys get to make the decision how you want to do that. If you want those tax rates in there, just make sure you get the FICA limit changed correctly before you run your W-2s. Talking about printing the tax forms, we do have to have that federal and state e-filing and reporting installed. That's basically the same tool that we needed in order to run the 1099s. And in order for that to be, excuse me, in order for that to be viable, you do need to have your BusinessWorks maintenance plan current. Otherwise, you will be denied from getting the tax table updates and or from getting the Atrix updates that are necessary to get the new forms for the year. What kinds of forms can we print? We can print the Form 940. That is the annual reconciliation of your federal unemployment. We can certainly print the quarterly 941s. We can print or e-file, any of the above, of course, but we can print or e-file our W-2s. And now on the employee side, the W-2s, we may do all these federal copies on plain white paper. It is recommended, suggested that you use the 4-part perforated paper with the IRS instructions for your employee copies. I have seen where the employee copies got printed on plain paper and a copy of the instructions got printed out, so they're not perforated, but I didn't tell you that. And then, of course, if you do wish to e-file or even have Atrix process and send your employees their forms, that can be done. There is an additional fee that gets charged directly by Atrix. Excuse me, got a little frog in my throat here. As far as our state forms, The unemployment form for Indiana, and again, I can speak directly to Indiana. I will encourage you to talk to your local CPAs if you are not in the state of Indiana. Your unemployment needs to be e-filed, or you need to fill it in on the Department of Workforce Development portal. Your Indiana withholding, your state and local withholding forms, again, those go through the Department of Revenue portal, the Indiana Department of Revenue portal, so there really isn't any paper that is getting printed anymore. And again, as I mentioned, the W-2s may be printed on white paper. The key is that you get the instructions sent to the employees. That's really what the big requirement is the employees must get a copy of the instructions. And any of those things can also be e-filed. And one other point of note, in Indiana, again, I can speak to that only because that's what I am most familiar with, but if you have 25 or more employees, you must e-file your state copy of the W-2s. The federal law, if I recall, is somewhere in the ballpark of 250 employees to be required to e-file the federal copy. So if you're in that window, more than 25, less than 250, you may print your federal and send those in via paper mail, or you may e-file them, but you must e-file the Indiana side of it. So just a reminder to those of you, especially if you're new, processing tax forms at the end of the year. Updates. When do I get updates? Oh, goodness gracious. The tax table service pack update will be out soon. I don't have an exact date on that, but it's usually right near the end of the year. Atrix. I grin because Atrix seems like they are constantly pumping out updates at the end of the year. Do not be surprised that you fire up your federal and state e-filing and tax reporting one day and you get prompted for the automatic update, and then the next day you go back into it and doggone it, I just did this update yesterday, or even the same day. I have had it update on me twice in the same day. Do not be surprised by that. Just go ahead and follow through the process of getting those updates. Let Atrix install what it needs to install. No, it's not necessarily for each and every one of you. It might be some other state forms that you are not a member of. Just go ahead and let it do it. Let it do its updates. Otherwise, it might pop out watermarked forms that are not fileable. So let's talk about those Atrix updates here. I'm actually going to switch over to the software and show you pretty much what happens here. So as I go into my payroll and I go into the taxes section, I have my option here for enhanced tax reporting and e-filing. I could also get to it from the W-2 forms or the Print 941 or the Print 940, but I guess I just grew up on finding it here. And of course, whether I've got a deposit that's outstanding, I may get that prompt. And I will get a window here that shows me all of the forms. And at the end of the year, the first question is, wait a minute, why do I not have the current forms? Why do they still say, in my case, 2021 or even 2020? It's okay. It is because Atrix will take care of the update for the end of the year. And I'm going to use the W-2 here. Let me find it. It says 2020 W-2. So, people get, or 2021 in this case, maybe they may get real excited about that. Don't get excited. It's okay. When you go out, Atrix will start like it's going to do its thing and start getting ready for that data. But it will come up, and if it has an update to offer you, you will be prompted to perform the update. So I'm going to go ahead and do the automatic update. And of course, I get all of these fun little prompts here. In this case, I'm still waiting for it to finish its thing. Goes out, it downloads all those forms for all of the jurisdictions. Go ahead and install them. We used to be able to pick and choose. If, let's say I only wanted to pick the Indiana forms, I didn't want the South Dakota forms. There's no choice anymore. Just do it. Just go ahead and get it all done. And it will go through all of the various forms, and you'll get to see. Um, and interestingly enough, because Atrix is tied with AP as well as with payroll, when you're doing one side or the other update, you may see forms that don't make any sense. Why would I see 1099 forms here? Or if I'm processing 1099s, why am I seeing all these payroll forms? It's all the same software umbrella. It just all downloads everything. We will just go ahead and let it do its thing. And of course, this takes a few seconds, sometimes a little longer if you haven't done an update for a while. And I really hate making you watch all this, but I do want you to be aware that it isn't always a 10-second update. Normally it is. If you keep yourself current, it's not that difficult, but I haven't updated in a while, so it is running a little crankier for me. One other note of caution while this is still finishing its updates, we can go back and reprint forms from historical periods. What we cannot do is, let's say, for example, it's 2022 and I need to produce a 2020 W-2. Atrix will not let me go back like that. So once you have made the update of the forms for the current year, we can only access those historical forms as they were previously prepared. So keep that in mind if for some reason you have to go back. And I had a question about 1099s. Somebody needed to produce one from a couple of years ago, and it's like, I can't do that in the software because that physical form layout does not exist anymore. And if you need to do the ACA reporting, the capabilities are here in Atrix to be able to facilitate that too. And the life of a software support person is watching the blue bar. Thank you for your patience. There we go. Now that we have that, go ahead and acknowledge that it's done. I won't see my numbers change yet because Atrix is actually going to go out and start the generation of what I had requested. I didn't think I had that many employees in there. There we go. Now it's cooking. You will notice that I had selected 2020 as the reporting year. That was what was available in my sample data, but it's telling me, hey, you've got the 2022 forms now. So it looks like Atrix updates have started coming out for this year. And I can go ahead and start my process. So there are some questions that you might have to answer, changing some values. Sometimes an address changes and it might recognize if you've processed previously. and you want to update those values, you go ahead and select those which you would like to change. And then Atrix gives us the wizard. As I have done this for a while, the test drive for me is not very fulfilling. Um, I know that I can restart anytime. So I usually just go ahead and say start processing, confirm my federal ID number. Should be, for those of you who have done this before, should be pretty um, typical. If you are consolidating payroll from multiple BusinessWorks companies, so if I'm using the same employer ID number across multiple BusinessWorks companies, I can consolidate those W-2s. And there's a process for, the order in which you run them, and at what point you say, hey, this is the final reporting entity. Otherwise, if it's just a single company file, you go ahead and continue. Confirm your name, address, telephone, fax number, contact information. If there is something that is missing, Atrix will let you know, and it will not let you continue. Oh, it says, okay, my address is invalid, so I'm going to go ahead and just put something on there to make it work. I would say 99.9999% of us are filing for our own company or employer. We'll go ahead and say next. And we get greeted with this particular window here that barks at us to determine whether or not we've got legitimate tax ID numbers. And the Indiana State Unemployment Tax ID. Well, why do I need that on my W-2s? Well, you don't need it on your W-2s other than to be able to move forward. So whatever your 6-digit number is, you want to make sure that you don't have any red lines. You want to make sure that your local items are configured properly. And then we just go ahead and continue. You've got your questions here. Anybody who's exempt from Medicare or Social Security, any clergy, control numbers. Everybody always asks about the control numbers. Back in the day, when these things had to get processed by a typewriter or by hand, control numbers would often be put on there so that it was easier to sort and organize the paper copies. And then subsequently on the W-3, you could also put a control number to help identify which group of them there is. It is not a requirement to use a control number. It's really at your discretion. Atrix also facilitates in its e-filing process to send W-2 forms electronically if you opt for that. If you are either going to print them or just manual or do the e-filing without the electronic copy, Atrix will mail your employees a copy of their W-2. And here's where you would identify the W-3 control number if you need it. A required checkbox here is what kind of a payer are you? I would say the majority of us are 941. You might have a few 943 organizations. You might have like a household employer or whatever. I would, like I said, the majority of us would be Form 941. And we also have to fill out, are we a governmental or a not-for-profit entity? If we are, we pick one of these choices. If we are not, we say that none apply. You must fill that in or it will get angry with you. If you had to do any third-party sick pay, and I hope none of this is true that your business terminated this year, but if you need to, you can enable that checkbox. How do I want to print the Social Security numbers? I can, on the employee copies, I can show the full Social Security number. I can truncate it with asterisks or I can truncate it with X's. For the employee copy, my logic says don't truncate it on the employee copy because how are they going to be able to tell you that their number was incorrect if it's truncated? Again, this is completely up to you folks. And then Atrix goes out and it starts its processing. It pulls your data, your wage data, your tax withholding data, your 401 withholdings, your health insurance information, anything that you've got set up for being marked on the W-2s shows up in our Atrix grid. And this is actually pretty sweet because I can now see all of my static information, names and addresses and social security numbers on the left-hand side. I can see all of my numeric data, wages, withholdings, etc. on the right-hand side. I get my totals up at the top here. The goal is that the totals of these boxes match the summaries of the 941s. That's kind of a double check to make sure that you're doing these all appropriate. And you get the opportunity to make any manual corrections if you want. If not, you can go ahead and just continue to walk through the wizard, and it will let you know what things are not getting filled in properly. If you've got 401k withholdings, as this particular company did. Here we go. I've got one gentleman here. If I try to continue, I should get barked at. I don't know if it will or not. Yep. Oh, and there's a couple of other things. Here's some issues with the Medicare wages. Again, not jiving with the appropriate limit. I've got a form that is looking at the wrong wage limit, so it is going to yell at me. We get the opportunity to go back and correct. And you can go through and you can correct this as much as you would like until you make that final filing. And even if you do make that final filing, we have the ability to go back and send corrected forms. So there's a lot of capability here. If you haven't done this before, if you want to save as a work in process so that you can come back in right where you left off, you go ahead and save that. And you can go on, do your next thing, and then come back in. So when I come back in, I just want to share with you what this is going to look like now that I've done that major update. When I look at my form numbers, I will see that they are all now reflective of 2022. So even though that first one does not come up quite correctly, well, and this one's still showing older because that form hasn't been finalized yet. But as I go through, I will see these numbers update after I process various automatic updates that get offered to me. So we've done a pretty healthy walkthrough of updating, walking through the actual process of a form. However, if you get errors while you try to do that automatic update, it is very possible that your network security has not allowed for certain Atrix components to be considered trusted. You can use this particular listing here if you're comfortable making the changes yourself. You can certainly do that in your copy of your Edge Explorer or your Internet Explorer or your Internet, basically your Internet options in the control panel. Set up those various sites as trusted sites. If you're still having difficulties, you might need to ask your IT folks to check certain ports, make sure that they allow for that. And if you're still having a lot of issue, please reach out. We've had pretty good experience on how to correct a lot of these issues. You may go out to the customer portal. Can I get a show of hands of all of you who know what if you have access to the Sage customer portal and whether or not you use that? I see a couple so far. Use that portal. Oh my goodness gracious. It has got so much information. It allows you access to Sage's knowledge base. It allows you access to download those particular updates that we've talked about. It allows you to join a community called Sage City. Sage City is a pretty cool forum where you can pose a question, and Sage software support technicians are usually out there monitoring it. Other users are monitoring it. We monitor it, and we try to respond if we see something where we feel like we've got a fair answer to offer. And that's all part of your maintenance plan. So feel free to go out and utilize that. DWD uses a slightly different entrance. It's called the partner portal, but the information is all the same. The knowledge base that you access through the customer portal is the same knowledge base that the BusinessWorks techs use when you call them with a question. So by all means, try to jump out there and get your hands into that as you can. All right, lots of information. I don't know about you guys. I hope your heads are not exploding, but there was a lot of stuff out there here today. I would like to open up the floor for any questions. Feel free to either type them, or if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you. Whatever works out for you. Let me throw this question out for you. If I can get a raised hand, does anybody need help processing their 1099s or their W-2s this year? And if you would like, oh, I've got a quick question here. Thank you for kind comments. And for PDFs, if you can get into your control for the webinar, there is a section called handouts, and you are welcome to download the handout. We will also be sending a recording out to everybody who was registered for this. And for those of you who would like assistance, I'm going to ask you to reach out to me. I would love to get you on my calendar so that I can help you get those evil year-end nasty forms taken care of. So again, my name is Mary Hildinger. For those of you whom I have not had the pleasure of meeting directly yet, would love to be of assistance to you. All right, if nobody else has any questions or comments, I will bid you all a phenomenal day. And thank you for coming and listening to me babble here for a little bit. And if you've got anything with which you need assistance, please do not hesitate to reach out.